So there is freedom, dynamism or dynamic or movement. We're meant to grow. That's what's natural to human beings, to grow, to move. And I will tell you this, that everybody is always moving. It's not always necessarily towards God, though. Right? So that movement can't ever be suppressed. We are always moving towards something, away from something, but as human beings, we're always moving. And the last thing, which will be obvious, is that we're created communally, right? So everything's good, and the first time God says something is not good is when what? When he's alone. That's right. So we're meant to be communal. And this freedom is meant to be experienced in this communal context. I was speaking with, was it you, Pat, about idios? You're right. So, the reflexive pronoun in Greek for self, right, is idios. That's where we get the word idiot, right? So you have an idea then of what's characteristic of an idiot. Someone who doesn't realize his interdependence or her interdependence on others. So man is created in this, the image of God that's dynamic, that's free, that's communal. And this is, if I could sort of, not big enough here. Some of you have read my book. You're cheating. I can tell. This is what we call this movement. This is what life looks like. It starts with awareness, being able to see God everywhere, right? Being in the present moment and being able to see God's love and his revelation to us, the revelation of his love everywhere, in every situation, in every person, in every place. Being present enough to see God's presence. Reminds me of St. Seraphim, who greeted everyone, my joy. He saw the resurrection, the paschal life everywhere. Because he lived in the moment. He lived in this truly free way. And that awareness of God's love should lead to what? That's right, Eucharist, right? Thank you, Lord. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your revelation. Thank you for your grace in every moment. Which leads to offering ourselves back up to the Lord, right? In fullness. Lord, you have all of me. Thank you so much. It's the only response after gratitude is to offer my life back in the same way that the Lord has offered himself to me, which leads to communion, theosis. It leads to this intimacy, which is what Eden was the context for. And the whole cycle starts all over again. Because communion leads to a what? A deeper awareness of who God is. A deeper awareness of who our fellow man is. And it goes like that over and over again. And here's the beauty. Because God is infinite, even God willing when we are in his presence someday, we will never be able to know the depths of God and his love. And so our understanding and our experience of this communion with him grows deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper throughout all of eternity. That's what life is. That's what life is. And I will even say that this right here, this is man's identity. This is what his identity is defined by. life. This is the divine life that the Lord intended for us. Does that make sense? Does that seem intuitive, what you read in the Scriptures? Yes, what you've heard? The world we live in is filled with wonder and revelation. It's supposed to be a sensory experience of God's love and goodness. The energy of our lives has a natural home. Life, fulfillment, and meaning come when we accept and embrace this reality, when we say yes to this kind of daily orientation. Freedom is not a power. It's the gift of acceptance, surrender, harmony. And since freedom is always connected with human movement and activity, it is always an experience of the present moment. Always an experience of the present moment. So, this is the divine hope, right? This is the divine intention. But something happened different. This is actually not the narrative of the world we live in. Something else happened. And there was no brown here, but there's 3 trees that we find in the Scriptures. 3 trees. The first tree that's in the garden is the tree that God prohibited Adam and Eve from eating of, right? And the reason why is because he didn't want them to experience what? Evil, suffering, death, right? This was a loving commandment. God's not the great killjoy in the sky. This was about preserving life. But the serpent dupes Adam and Eve. The serpent gets Adam and Eve to believe that maybe there's something more. Maybe there's something more. That life can't be found, the fullness of life can't be found in this. Something more. And this is the whole ploy of advertising, right? There's something more that you need that you don't have. Right? I mean, it's advertising 101. And that's exactly what happens in the garden. Life can't be found in the Creator, it's found in the creation. And there's a moment of deliberation. It's great, the dialogue that goes back and forth between the serpent and Eve. Did God really say that? And you can tell there's this deliberation. And Maximus says about this interaction, that it's at the moment that Adam and Eve deliberate as to whether or not God is good and is completely sufficient and completely enough for them. As soon as they deliberate that life can be found anywhere else, and then they choose, at the moment they choose, is when they become enslaved. When they choose. With real freedom, there is no choice. It's movement towards God. But as soon as they choose, they're enslaved. And this leads to a completely different reality. And you see here this arrow that misses the mark, right? If this is the mark, if this is the target, that we're to grow into freedom to the Holy Trinity, this direction misses the mark. And that's what, of course, sin means, amartia, right? To miss the mark, miss the target. Evil is not some sort of separate creation. God didn't create evil. It's a parasite on the good. That's what evil is. It's a distortion of the good. That's what evil is. And so, a different trajectory is created altogether. And in the same way that we blew up this path of freedom, if we could do that for slavery, it would look something like this. Sorry, you may not be able to see this. Okay, I'll lift it up. This is what, in the book, I call the cycle of suffering, which is what this other path is. We prayed that our loved ones would not experience any longer. So, when you are born into a broken world, you're immediately subjected to a broken world. And by definition, you're victimized by living in a broken world. It's just true. It's okay if you don't want to think of yourself as a victim. It's okay. But you are. You are. And the way that this normally plays out in our lives, and none of us like to say this because we love our parents and so forth, but we don't grow up with perfect parents. And we don't grow up with perfect siblings, and we don't grow up with perfect childhood and childhood friends, etc., etc. And I grew up with a saintly. But my childhood wasn't perfect. And here's the problem. This right here is a loss of identity. This is a loss of identity. So what we do is we end up trying to find our identity in all kinds of things. We try on different masks all throughout our life as we're growing up, right? And we try on different masks where we feel loved, we feel like we get attention, we feel secure, because there's something missing here in our childhood experiences or with our parents. It wasn't perfect, and we can't expect it to be, right? And so we figure out how to cope. We figure out how to cope with our loss of identity, with not being perfectly loved. And we take these coping mechanisms in our childhood and we bring them into our adult life. And they worked for us as a child, you know. So a personal example. My father is still with us, and a good relationship with my father. Very loving relationship. But my father was an angry and demanding father when I was a kid. And for a lot of reasons. And so I very quickly learned how to control myself and my atmosphere in order to step around that anger, right? I figured out how to do it. I learned how to control things. And I learned how to act around him so that I could stay out of trouble, so I could sort of blend into the wallpaper, right? Kept me out of trouble. I wasn't ever thinking about this. This is what I did as a kid. And that's normal. The problem is, I took that into my adult life too. That ability to control things, right? Well, that's not so good when you bring that into your adult life. I always say that our coping mechanisms, and we all have them, there's not a single person in this room that doesn't have good coping mechanisms you learn in childhood. All of us do. They're always our greatest vocational strength. They're the things that make us successful in our work, right? So being able to control things is really good when you're managing projects and getting stuff done and executing things. But controlling behavior is not so good in intimate relationships. No one likes to be controlled, right? And so you control things, and it worked really well as a kid. out onto other people. And it usually leaks out on the people that we love. It leaks out on our spouses. It leaks out on our children, our closest friendships, even church. And then we start the whole cycle all over again. And then the people that we love are victims of a broken world because of just being loved by us. Right? It's sad, but it's ordinary. It's just ordinary. But it should hit close to home for all of us. Right? So unfortunately, this is the cycle of this other existence. And this is when Father prayed about mourning, grief, and sorrow. That's what this is about. Mourning, grief, and sorrow. So, thank God the story doesn't stop there. This is the first Adam here. But again, as I said last night, the Lord found it entirely intolerable to see man enslaved in this kind of suffering. And so he sent his Son. And this is the second tree the Scriptures talk about. This time, draw another human here. This human is the second Adam. And this is the life he lives. He sees his Father everywhere, is in constant communion with his Father, constantly giving thanks, offering himself up even unto death in perfect love and obedience on the cross. And is always in communion with his Father. And so, as we said last night, when Jesus dies on the cross and enters death can't hold him. And he offers us his life, so that we can step into this. But it requires something of us. Father mentioned this morning or last night, this idea of synergy. And we see it in the resurrection icon. It's my favorite icon. Adam and Eve reaching out from the grave, right? Reaching out as to say, this is what I want. Yes, Lord. This is what I want. But the position of the hand is what's so amazing. It's the Lord who is grabbing Adam and Eve by the wrist and pulling them out. There's only one person who saves, right? But your part is to say, yes, I want this. I want something different than this. I'm worn out. I'm tired by this experience. This brings me pain and suffering. This destroys my relationships. This is what I want. So I'm going to stop just for a second. Observations, questions? Does this all seem elementary to you all? Seem like, oh yeah, this is... Yes, please.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but in the top, every child is born pure. And as you say, we're the ones that take that purity and corrupt it. And
Right.
not because we're trying to,
No.
with good intention.
Yes.
So we try very hard to train our children to follow that at the same time of doing the other. How do we balance that? Okay, where's the prescription?
Well, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. And so I have to say thank you for being vulnerable and saying that, because sometimes this is a really difficult thing to share with people, especially with parents. It's easier to share it with kids because they relate real well with sort of being on the bottom end of things rolling downhill. But I'm looking at your faces, and it's hard not to read like, oh, this is hard to hear. And it is hard to hear. That's part of the reason why I shared last night with you who I am and my broken past. This is hard, but it is the reality of our lives. And the worst thing that we can do, is push it away. I'm just going to quickly, any of you familiar with Rumi, the poet? I'm just going to read something to you just a second. You're going to think that I'm some sort of poetry fanatic. It's not true, actually. But there are a few that really speak to me. This is called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. Joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house and take its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably, he may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them all in. Be grateful for whatever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So, there's one thing that if I could persuade you of one thing today, it would be to not push away the stuff and the feelings that you have inside, the memories, all of that. That's actually what creates the problem. That's what creates the problem. I tell people it's like a beach ball. You ever been in a pool and you had, beach balls you're playing with and you shove it underwater? You can't keep it underwater. And when it comes up, you don't know what's going to go out here, or pop you in the face. That's the same thing that happens in this world. With this comes grief, sorrow, and mourning, what we prayed this morning. That is the natural result, and every one of us experience it on some sliding scale differently in our lives, right? For some, it's horrendous. Others, it's not so much. But if you do this, and you pack it down, I guarantee you, it'll pop you back up and hit you in the face sooner or later. Or if it doesn't hit you in the face, it might hit your wife, or your daughter, or your son, or your best friend. And so, what I want to do later, after maybe a little bit of break, I want to talk about what it looks like to actually deal with those, and look at a scriptural model for that, actually a Christological model for that, and answer your question. Because this is reality and this is ordinary, and we should expect it. And because we expect others to be broken, and because we expect ourselves to be broken, is even more reason why we need to reach out and say, Lord, have mercy. This is the reason why the Jesus prayer is so incredibly important. Because in the Jesus prayer, what do? We do this. We sit quietly in the present moment, right here, not in the past, not in the future. We become aware of His presence, and we enter into His life. We enter into this life, the only life, His life. Any other questions before we go on? Feel free, please, whatever.
I've never had children. My sister did, and she had them very early age, and I helped raise them. And when I was raising these kids, it was a rough. She was having a tough time raising kids, and I didn't know anything about child rearing at all. And to answer your question, I tried. wants to know where I got that information, because it came from one of two places. It came from Mike, and it came from God. He wants me to know. He wants me to think. That's not good. That's good. So that information, having that instill in you at a very young age to question whether that came from the light or whether it came from the dark is imperative. It's just, that's what it's about. You want to know. Because instinctively, we all know the difference between right and wrong. But when you ask, how do you balance that? You want to make sure that that person has the ability to know the difference between right and wrong and good and evil.
Thank you, Brian. I think that that's right. So it's interesting. So Maximus says that freedom is impossible without an accurate vision of the true good. Freedom is impossible without an accurate vision of the true good. Right? So you have to know what goodness looks like, right? To freely move in goodness. So I would say that the majority of us, so I'll use an example again. When we try to step out of vulnerability in front of you as much as possible in our time together. So this interaction just happened with my 15, almost 16-year-old daughter just 2 days ago. She and I have been rubbing up against one another, and there's a little bit of this passive-aggressive thing going on, and um, being quiet with one another, which is honestly withholding of love, which is not good, right? That's what happens when we're being stubborn. And I know that there's something going on inside of me. There's something boiling, tweaking, and I've learned that when that switch gets flipped inside, I get that emotional tweak that there's something boiling inside. That's me. That's me. I don't like it, and I want to push it away from it as soon as possible, right? And usually when I do that, someone else gets hurt. But, so I go into her room, and she just moved out to live with me on the day after Christmas. She's having a really tough time in transitioning between her friends and school and so forth. It's hard. I moved around when I was a kid, and my heart breaks for her. And it's really difficult for me to see that she's struggling in my home. I want her to feel secure. I want her to feel settled. I want her to feel loved. I want her to feel taken care of. I don't want her to struggle. I would say that the parent's greatest pain is the pain of their children, right? Anytime you see your children suffer, there's no greater pain. But instead of feeling compassion for my daughter, I'm feeling this kind of anger because I can't what? Oh my gosh. You guys are like psychiatric experts. What? Am I that transparent? Yeah. I can't control her grief and her sorrow, and I can't control her transition. And what's really going on has absolutely nothing to do with my daughter. Nothing. Zilch. It's me. Because somehow, if she doesn't feel secure and loved, and if it doesn't work out perfectly, and even if she decides to go back home at some point, what does that mean about me? I failed. Terrible parent. Does any of that Because I've lost my identity. And I'm trying to find it someplace where I can't find it. And so I know this is going on. And I sit down in bed with my daughter and we start talking, and I say, Claire, did you know what's really going on with me? What's really going on is that I feel like that I'm failing you as a parent, and I'm going to fail you as a parent, and somehow I'm going to end up long-term having this poor relationship with you. And that's about the most intolerable thing I can think of. Is you are one of the greatest skills in my life. You see how this cycle happens? You see? I have stuff from my childhood, and I learned to cope with that stuff. And I brought that stuff into my adult life, and trying to control it and whatever. It's got that fight-flight thing going on. Some people become very aggressive and controlling. Other people avoid. But both are a misdirected energy. We're moving, but we're moving doing all the wrong things in a misdirected way. And that movement causes impact in other people's lives. And so when you ask me how we can do this whole parenting thing, I would simply say to you, and we're going to get there, what this actually looks like. Like I tell the chaplains, you focus on me. The best thing you can do for your children is own your stuff. That's the best thing you can do for your kids. And it doesn't matter if they're still in the home or if they left. It does not matter. There's always a redemptive path. No matter where we're at in life, the path of redemption is always in front of us. Always. We are never defined by our bad decisions and sinful behavior. Never. We're defined by the Lord's love for us. And there's always a redemptive path in front of us. That's just the truth. And our bad decisions and our poor behavior never, ever trump God's love. Ever. I don't care how bad it is. It never trumps God's love. And in His sovereignty, with all the suffering and all the bad decisions in the world, His sovereign love still weaves through all of it. So there's always this offering of goodness and light everywhere else. It's never swallowed by the darkness. Ever. That's the beauty of God's love and sovereignty. So, I want to go on, but I tell you what, you guys want to take just like a 5-minute break? 10-minute break? Get some coffee, go to the bathroom? 10 minutes? Beautiful. I will. Thank you, Father. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have, I've got another. Yeah. I would love more copies. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am. I had all of these were in my book, and I took them out at the last minute because I didn't think anybody would get it. I am too. Well, I'll give you some more then that I'll be drawing up there. So, yeah. Good. I hope it's helpful. Yeah, feel free.
Dark chocolate almond, rock my.
Thank you. Okay, Father. What's that? Oh, if you'd like. Yeah. You know, these were all, and there's a whole lot more. These were all supposed to go in the book, and I took them out at the last minute. Yeah. That's a great idea. Yeah. Yep. Well, there's a whole lot of stuff I'd love to add now that it's written it out there, you know. So that's a good idea. Same here. That's the reason why I did this. I had to draw it out and see it. Yep. Well. No, that's okay. That's okay. I'll give them to you, and you can. Okay, great. Okay. We'll get going again. Presbytera, I know why these rock your world. These are delicious. Okay. So during the break, Pat showed me a video of Father dancing. Your priest can bust a move. I saw him on his back on the floor right here. Amazing. Father, you're in good shape. Okay. So, about transparency. That's right, Father. So, would you all permit me to do a little reading from the book? And the only reason why I'm asking you to do it is not because I think it's great writing, but because there's a story in here, and if I don't read it, I probably won't remember all the details, and so I'd rather just read some of it to you, if that's okay. And it's a personal story. It's a story with my oldest daughter, Hannah. During my daughter Hannah's junior year in high school, she formed a friendship that troubled her. Her friend was subsisting on food stamps and wore the same clothes day after day. Her friend lived with her dad and older sister not far from us. The father was out of work, and both sisters had jobs at competing fast food restaurants near their home. Both sisters were very bright, but they struggled to maintain good grades because they worked so much. There were regular stories of unpaid bills and a less than ambitious but demanding father. As troubling as all of these details were, I sensed that there was a deeper issue here, and I wanted to understand what it was. One day after school, Hannah asked if I could give the friend and her sister a ride home. I agreed, and they directed me to an extended stay hotel. For Hannah's friend, her father and her older sister, home was one room with 2 queen-size beds, a sink, and a stove. They had been living that way for over a year. The sisters dreamed of going to college, but I wondered if it was possible without their father's support. Despite their daily challenges, the girls seemed to function without self-pity or any real evidence of depression or negativity. Hannah always described them as happy and positive. The girls got out of the car that afternoon without the least appearance of embarrassment and politely thanked me for the ride. As we left the parking lot, I empathized with Hannah. Her friend was living a broken existence far from her own control. One night during the spring semester, Hannah snuggled up next to me in her usual way that let me know she wanted to talk. Her friend, her older sister, and her father had just collected their income tax return. Between the three of them, the IRS returned over $5,000. It was a windfall for this struggling family and the chance to gain some financial traction and stability. My mood brightened as she told me the story, but then I saw my daughter's facial expressions fall. She told me that after paying a couple of small bills, the father took the money to the casino and lost everything. Apparently, this was a well-established pattern, one that left the girls working and wondering whether or not they would have enough money for food and rent. What a life, I thought to myself. The girls must feel completely vulnerable and out of control. But I imagine their father feels the same way. This leads us to a place in this sharing that is hard to sort of dive into, but explains so much. Not just about this father and his girls, but our lives. Because we ask ourselves, maybe not about ourselves, but about people we know, why do they keep doing that? Why do they go back to that relationship? Why do they go back to that behavior? That's just crazy. It's insane. Why do people do that? Why do people take drugs? Why do people, and you fill in the blank? Okay? I'm sure all of you have asked that question hundreds of times. And it leads us to this sort of intuition that people's broken behavior doesn't have any logic to it, that it is crazy and insane. But I would tell you that the truth is far from that. That every dysfunctional behavior, all of sin, has a very definitive logic to it. It's, again, the word ordinary. And there is a psycho-logic to this behavior. And I want to sort of draw it out for you, and then I'm going to ask for your patience again while I read to you something about this father. So you remember when I told you that, and just tell me if you can't hear me because I'm going to move away from the mic for a second. Remember when I told you that St. Maximus said that freedom starts with an accurate vision, right? An accurate narrative. What's really going on. But in the cycle of suffering, you start with a different picture. You start from a different place. And that's where it all goes wrong. You start with a lie. And that's what we find in the garden with the serpent. And St. Paul talks about it in Romans 1:26. We exchange the truth of God for a lie. And that's where it starts. But remember how I said that tape is playing in our heads? The vices that all of the fathers talk about. All of the vices start with a string of lies that go all the way back to Eden. That God isn't enough. His life isn't enough. And we're looking for it somewhere else. And it's a part of that, we would just call it delusion. Prelist. Right? So, this psychologic that drives dysfunctional behavior starts with a belief. A belief. And that belief generally, I'm speaking in generalities, those beliefs generally come from two sources. Our parents, early childhood, it's just the truth. We're created communally, right? Or our experiences. Could be, maybe it's being bullied day after day on a school ground or on a school bus or in whatever context. Or it's an experience with parents that leave you thinking, believing somehow that I'm not enough, that I'm not lovable, there's something wrong with me, something defective, something flawed. Otherwise, why would people treat me that way? Right? Now, it's very likely that this kind of logic that I just went through is not something that you did. It's just something you subtly, unconsciously picked up inside. I must not be valuable. Otherwise, why would people treat me that way? And so this seed gets planted. And it starts running a tape in my head. I'm flawed. I'm not valuable. I need to hide. I should feel shameful. Right? There's something about me that is not acceptable. It starts with a belief. That belief drives something else. That belief drives perceptions about the world, right? We talked about a lens last night, that we see the world, right? So this belief, I enter into my own experience as an adult, and something happens. Well, I just assume that that something has to do with the tape that's playing in my head. You know, someone said to me someone said something to me. Well, it must have been. I interpret it as they don't like me. Somehow I'm not valuable, because that's my truth. That's my belief. That's my vision, right? So we have these perceptions that are subjective. They're not objective, they're subjective. But those subjective perceptions become our reality. They become our reality. So this is what happens in a fight between spouses. You said, she said, and they all, so it's going on between two people, but they triangulate on something else. They triangulate on the details of what objectively happened, right? So, I was having this conversation with someone last night. You know, a bank robbery happens, right, and there's 10 eyewitnesses, and the detective goes up and takes their stories. He gets how many stories? 10. Right. He doesn't get one. The whole idea of objective reality in relation, you just throw that out the window. If you find yourself in an argument with your spouse and you guys are fighting over details, of objective details, you should just stop. Start laughing, actually. Because you all are seeing it through your... sweet. See? You are seeing it through your own lens and through the tapes that are playing in your head. That's just true. That's how we see it. We think that we're so objective and that we got it all buttoned down. But we see it through our brokenness. So, this leads to something that is very, very important and is going to be the path that we talk about towards healing. You all may think you know where this is going. I'm not sure that you do. And it may be a little bit more difficult path than you think. But the next thing is this. Those perceptions No one likes to talk about this. They drive feelings. No one likes to talk about feelings. And those feelings usually go in one of two directions. Either in an aggressive fashion, anger, bitterness, passive aggressiveness, where I don't really say it to your face, but you know that I'm angry at you even though I said nothing, just by all my verbal actions or what I'm not doing, or because I've, distanced myself from you, I'm withholding something from you. That can be all very aggressive, right? Or self-protective, which is avoidance, right? I'm just going to pretend like it didn't happen. I'm going to pretend that you didn't say that. I'm going to go into my room and throw the covers over my head. I'm going to get in the car and leave. So it's either fight or flight. Our feelings go, again, remember, there's movement in us. You can't suppress it. It's going to go in one of two directions. So these perceptions drive feelings. And we don't like feelings. And we don't like feelings because we don't like to suffer, we don't like pain. And that is ordinary. You're not supposed to like pain and suffering. You weren't created for that. But that is the reality of our broken lives. But if you don't do something with this, like Rumi says, if you don't invite them all in laughing, if you don't welcome them, if you don't learn to become comfortable with the cross, you will not see resurrection. You will not see the redemptive path on this side if you cannot embrace this. What you will do is just continue to push it down and drive more of that cycle over and over and over again. And the unfortunate thing about that is it drives despair for other people that you're hurting, and it drives despair for yourself because you think it'll never change. I'll never get out of this. And of course, you can. And that's what the Lord's life, this is what He offers us. So, belief drives perceptions. Perceptions drive feelings. And feelings end up driving behavior or actions. And what we do, these feelings, when they become intolerable enough, I use that word a lot. I really like it. Intolerable. It's really descriptive, right? When something becomes like you just can't stand anymore and you've got to do something, right? You've got to do something. This is the story of addictions. And I'm not just talking about drug addictions and alcohol. Any kind of addictive behavior. This is what happens. I think we characterize addicts as lazy and, unproductive and all of these adjectives. I don't think any of them are true, actually. I think that addicts are actually very, very proactive. They're trying to do something with their intolerable feelings inside, and so they go to something to get rid of them. It's actually very proactive. They're actually executing on something. Unfortunately, there's the chemical side that comes in that, there's an actual physical addiction as well that plays in with the emotional addiction. So, actions can be all kinds of things. We just talked about it. These are not at all exhaustive. I just put a few examples. We already talked about control. Control is what a lot of us do with our feelings. Substance abuse, on and on and on. You fill in the blanks. And I don't do this. I don't fill in the blanks because you know what the blanks are, and you can fill them in your own life. And once we do that action, what does it do? It reinforces that tape in our head. And that, my friends, is exactly how you get crazy behavior. That's how you get crazy behavior. It's really ordinary and really logical. And so when you see someone suffering and you think that they're insane, no. They're caught in a vicious loop. And there's such a wonderful opportunity for you to find compassion and help them, especially if you can identify sort of where they're at. Okay? See, you keep asking that. I'm going to get there. But I've got to build the suspense, though. You guys asked me here for a whole afternoon. If you wanted a webinar, I could have just given it over. I'm glad you want to know, though. But you may not want to know after I tell you. After all, it is the cross. It's the cross. But there's life on the other side of the cross. It's life. And that's what we want to experience. And when we get to begin to taste some of that life, that's what begins to drive a different engine. And I will tell you, in my life, and I am far from any saint or from having any real virtue, but I will tell you that the Lord needed to let me destroy myself, come to the end of myself, so that I could taste something different. Something different drives me now. Glory to God. So we're going to get there. Okay, so I want you to look at this while I read you this about her father. There are essentially 4 components to this psychologic: beliefs, perceptions, feelings, and actions. Each component builds consecutively on the component preceding it. Suffering begins with a belief system about life, people, relationships, success, etc. Our belief system develops over a lifetime, formed largely by our parents' belief system and our own experiences. Most of the time, we're unaware of this life orientation, but it's the cornerstone of all of our judgments. It reveals what each of us believes to be true and false, real and unreal. From these building blocks of personal truth, we form perceptions or interpretations about our experiences. Correctly defining and understanding perception is key because it is never truly objective. There can be 10 eyewitnesses to a bank robbery and 10 very different accounts. Each person brings a variety of personal and experiential lenses to a situation. The result is always a subjective interpretation, thus the saying, perception is reality. The personal experience of suffering begins when we perceive that our reality is unbearable and out of control. Our perceptions give way to feelings. Generally, when we feel out of control, it triggers a self-protective and aggressive emotional response: fear, frustration, anger, bitterness, resentment, etc. These feelings can be directed outward or inward, but they are always characterized by a deep dissatisfaction with the way things are. The emotions become the fuel and motivation for our subsequent behavior, which is the final component of suffering. The actions that evolve out of our psychological need to gain control or equilibrium are always some kind of compromise. That is, they are not the direct actions we could take. They are not the direct actions we could take. Solving the problem directly is either out of our control or doesn't feel safe. Does that make sense? You follow me when I say that? Therefore, we take other indirect actions, often fueled by fight or flight emotions. They can come in a variety of forms, including passive-aggressive behaviors and addictions. Hannah's friend's father believed he could create his own reality. At the very least, he was willing to take the risk of creating his own reality. Perhaps this risk came from a place of real pain, the pain of not being able to adequately care for the practical needs of his daughters. Perhaps he felt completely out of control and unable to steer the dictating circumstances of his life. If so, it's not illogical to think that he would be willing to engage in a high-risk behavior like gambling. The real crisis here is not the gambling. The real crisis is the unbearable personal pain. It is the pain that ultimately fuels the delusional belief that he can control his reality through gambling. Once his mind is convinced that he can change his reality through high-risk behavior, everything and everyone is filtered through this delusional lens. He interprets people, perceptions. He interprets people, including his own daughters, and situations as either allies or enemies. He must because the only other alternative is despair or defeat. And those are the very things from which he's running. At this stage, his mind is made up, and there is very little anyone can do to change the course of events. He cannot see any other options. An associated or random crisis of greater pain is the only possible intervention at this point, like a midlife crisis. With a plan firmly in place, he already feels a sense of control and relief. Can I read that again? Think about this and think about your own life. With a plan firmly in place, he already feels a sense of control and relief, even before he spends that money, right? Because he's thinking about something, some magical moment when all of his pain is going to go away. And before he even, rolls the dice or the lever or whatever, however he gambled it away, he already feels those endorphins running over him as though he's already there. There is a false sense of hope and happiness that comes over him, a lightness that he has longed to feel. These delusional beliefs fuel the fantasy of what his life and his daughters will be like once he feels in control again. The more he rehearses this fantasy, the more resolved he becomes to take action, and the more convinced he becomes that it is the logical and right thing to do. By the time he engages in the risk, he has tunnel vision. So when the weight of the risk and its consequences begin to be felt, he commits fully and dives even deeper into the behavior. He believes that if he turns back at this point, not only is there no hope for personal control over the pain in his life, but that there also will be nothing left of his personal self-respect or identity. He's convinced that his acceptance from others depends completely on his ability to be in perfect control of his life. He believes it's do or die. Doesn't sound so crazy, does it? If the pain is intolerable enough, you're willing to do just about anything to push it away and to engage in high-risk behaviors. And thus the story of our lives. At some level, maybe you don't have a gambling addiction. I'm sorry to laugh at that. We all are in different places. But it's the same logic that drives any of our behaviors. It's the same craziness. Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's right. Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so what you just said is just, it's the distorted version of what we started with in Eden, with all of our senses, right? Our senses were meant to make us aware of God, right? And instead, when our senses become distorted and they begin to focus on the creation, right? They fuel something completely different. They fuel delusion as opposed to awareness. It's just the opposite. Again, these are not separate creations. It's just a distortion of the truth. It's a distortion of what is good. That's what the passions are. And again, as we said earlier, it all starts, all of the passions, all of the vices start with a string of lies. And then it just builds. And it builds like a snowball going downhill. But what I want to absolutely leave you with is this is not just the case for gambling and addictions. This is what's happening in your fight with your spouse or with your children. You're starting with something up here, and this always has to do every single time. Every single time, this has to do with our identity. Yes, ma'am.
This isn't really a question, I don't think, but with mental, I got people very close to me in the Lord's will. This cycle seems to be the same
Absolutely.
in mental illness, but this cycle aggravates mental illness, but it's not the same thing. So.
That's right. But mental illness comes from the same place too, brokenness. I mean, broken genetics. Brokenness exhibits itself in all kinds of ways. Again, the mourning, the grief, and the sorrow. This is what this world brings, and that's the reason why it was intolerable for the Lord, and He sent us His Son. But this is what the whole world is grieving over. The whole world is grieving over the loss of its identity. And that's why Jesus had to come, to give us His identity, so that we could know what is normal, right? So, 2:30, are you ready for the answer? You ready for the way out? No. Ready for the way out. Right, jump in,
So the
Father.
thing, this is why we go to church, right? The belief is the most important thing. It is all about this. Many times we look at action. Many times when people come to me for confession, they talk about their action. And we all try to get to the feelings, which are very hard. Sometimes we talk about the feelings, right? Because they're intolerable. But this is, as a priest, and I think all of us and ourselves, or even as parents or as spouses, whatever, we see action and we get upset about action. But we need to get to what are the feelings behind our action.
Amen.
And then we need to once we got the feelings, we need to then go behind what is it that you're seeing, so that I can see what you're seeing, because I see differently than you see. And I'm getting into your world. And that's what a priest tries to do in confession, or it'd be best. And then, this is the hardest. But this is the most important. And this is why we have a creed, and we have a faith, and why we are Orthodox. And this is why we make a big deal, because this can change. But this is the hardest to get to. What do you really believe? Sometimes people stop here. Because we don't have a religious background, in the secular world, we almost go back. But the belief, what do you really believe? And so we're always, a lot of times the world is here, we're here, but we have to, so you see, this is the cycle that we live in, but we end up having to go, our spiritual work, our emotional work, whatever work, is going backwards, I see, to finally get to our identity. And he's, Christ is trying to bring us back to how He created us. And to give us His identity. We put on Christ. All who have been baptized have put on Christ. Yes, something was done to us when we were children. But every day I have to personally choose to put Him on. That's my action. And I have to try to choose to, Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, come and abide. Come and help me believe what you see. You know, when we say we want to see ourselves how Christ sees us. You know? So, there's the spiritual work, and a lot of it is, and this is, especially when we're dealing with our loved ones and our kids, we have to, because this is not easy. The action is easy. We get upset. Why were you late? Why did you do this? Why did you do, you know, we might even say, and then we reprimand based on action. And that's just pure behaviorism. But we you know, there's a lot more, right? But the belief is everything. The belief is everything.
Well, this is the struggle with the devil, okay? This is the struggle with Satan. What I don't see in here is God's, is the part where you can go to God and try to break this cycle and not struggle, okay? Right. In other words, it's a battlefield. The life is a battlefield between Satan trying to force you to do something and God trying to help you not do it. Okay? Right. Now we know in the end that God will always be victorious over Satan. Right? But in the middle, we're pulled between two things. So what I see here is just Satan's cycle. I don't see God in this cycle anywhere trying to help you out. Okay.
You're just begging for that, for the final spot. This is the second time. You really want it, don't you? I am not going to disappoint you. I promise. I am not going to disappoint you. Okay, so over here, and then here, and then here. You say something, Bob?
You know, with these, just think about different, the Holy Fathers, say, if you think about God as logical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Many times that is
Yep.
stated,
Yep. Yep.
and yet you can think of, like Luther, and his view of God as an angry God.
Mm-hmm.
And that God is
It's to punish.
angry with God's thing, and that's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
way that we enter into this world, is God's wrath.
It's a radically different orientation there, isn't there? A radically different feel to that truth, that belief.
So, having a different set of beliefs about God or ourselves, that would lead to very different perceptions and
Yep.
the whole cycle. But, learn about God as He really is.
So that we can reorient, right? Isn't that what the word for metanoia, it means to reorient, right? To change one's mind. Change of a mind, reorienting to that vision of truth again. That's what Lent is all about. Right? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And all this trying to tell God, all the time, how big these mountains are.
Right.
We've got to tell we should be telling mountains how big our God is.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get there.
A few minutes ago, you used the words or the phrase distorted senses. A few minutes before that, you used the word credas or delusion. Last week, I went out the door to take a morning walk, and the skies were gray, and it was raining. And the first thing that I saw was gray skies and rain.
said, you made the choice. That's your perception of what happened.
Yes.
But if it's true that God is always taking the initiative to reveal himself to us,
Then he nudged me along.
he's always nudging you along. The question is when are your eyes open and your ears open to hear and see that? It's always there. We're under the constant positive pressure of God's love and revelation at all times. But we're also under this constant pressure of brokenness. And so the question is, what do you want to say yes to? Yes to it. I was telling Pat earlier that Father Tom Hopko said to me one time, sometimes our brokenness is so real that you just got to want to want to. You just got to want to want to. Right? Yes, yeah, it was. Yeah, he said it often.
Because sometimes people don't want to do it. If
Yeah.
they're being honest,
Yeah.
like sometimes I'll talk to people and I go like, I really don't want to give this up, Father. I really don't. I really don't want to give whatever, you know. And then I use Father Tom Hopko to say, okay, so you want to want.
Yeah.
Because the reality is we have to go back to that part. Like you'll say, if somebody says, I really love my wine. And I can't give it up, there's Lent. And I really love wine. You know.
Right, yeah, right? But that's why I said we have to start with reality. And I have stayed here in this place of brokenness for a long time in order to deliver the last talk. But you've got to stay here because we stay here so little. We give almost no thought or reflection to this place of our lives. And this is what Lent is all about. To actually do this work, to do this reflection so that we can enter into the resurrection, into his life, and not just some sort of intellectual assent of that, but into the actual lived reality of it. So we have to stay here just a little bit, and we're just about to flip the chapter. There was one more question. We're getting, were you going to ask something?
Yes, I have a common question. I'm curious if I can believe on my card, where the card side, where they use the picture there. What unbelief is using this combination of experience in childhood, correct?
It could be both, one or the other. Could be.
Doesn't necessarily have to be both?
No, ma'am. And it could be lots of other things, but we get our beliefs usually from our parents.
Okay, so if you are one, just will quote me, that pretty much almost, I think, dismisses the childhood,
Yep.
and that might be self-protective.
Yes, of course.
And, so that's going to affect everything after.
Yes. Yes.
The perception, your feelings,
Yes.
all that.
You guys are bright group. I said, you guys are a bright group. You get it.
Okay, so, like the well said that one. In this case, but, the feelings then, how do you feel that I as a person need to understand the other person's feelings?
No.
No.
You guys are begging for the next slide.
I don't think I'm begging for that. I'm just trying to.
Yes, you are. You don't know it.
The fact that a person expresses a feeling,
Okay.
that should be sufficient for me. There's no explanation, because if I don't understand the root of that feeling, and I'm told I don't need to understand, is that okay? Like, how do I resolve that?
How do you resolve that? That's interesting.
Well, it kind of goes a little bit back to with your daughter. It's very interesting how you're breaking it down. It says at the end, all you can tell your daughter is really what's going on with me and how I feel, or how I think what's going on with me about with you. I don't want to be a failure as a dad, or I don't want whatever. But you know,
And that's the reason why I couldn't hear my daughter. That's what I was confessing to her. That my daughter was expressing emotion, and I saw her emotions through my own insecurity, my own loss of identity, my own desire to control things. And so I missed her. I didn't see my daughter. All I saw was me. So in order to get to the other person, to actually hear them, I've got to be able to manage this and then become curious about them. Because our experiences are completely separate thumbprints, completely unique. Completely unique. So that was the point I was trying to make. It was about her, but I couldn't see that because it was all about me. Right, okay? So I want to draw one last thing in this picture that's missing. Very important for our faith. And I'm a terrible artist. You guys know what this is, right? Not bad. The problem with all of this is it's stuck right here. Chronos. Right? Did I get that right? Chronos. Is that right, Father? Mind. Is that right? No? Phronima. That's what happens when you get vulnerable with Greeks. Phronima. We're all stuck up here. Yeah, right. We're all stuck up here, and this is distorted, this is broken, and this is the reason why the fathers say this has to sit somewhere else. Where does this have to sit? Here. And this is the reason why the Jesus prayer is so important, because it's a tool to get us back to that experience of awareness, of being in the present moment, of putting everything back into perspective. So it's a tool.
They call that common sense.
Well, you know what? I would say there's some real truth in that. I mean, because that's, in my opinion, that's what you see in the Desert Fathers. Really very practiced common sense spirituality that was rooted in self-awareness. So, this all leads to where all of you want to go. Want to know how do we get out of this madness? Pardon me? Yes. What?
About the diagram.
Yes.
You drew it, correct me if I'm wrong, as if it were a closed system, but I have the impression that it is not.
I'm sorry, say that again?
That it is not a closed system. My impression is that the enemy, in particular, inserts himself in various aspects, like making this wheel spin. So, and from what Father said, where do we invite Christ?
Everybody keeps asking for this. You act like a bunch of Christians. Okay. So glad you want to know. You want to take a break first?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you on the front end, be patient with me. This is going to be an untraditional, very non-traditional sort of path towards spiritual maturity. When I'm finished, it's going to seem therapeutic to you in the beginning, but in the end, we're going to go straight to the gospel. Okay? So bear with me. The first step, I have 4 words for you. And by the way, these will not only help you in your life personally, but they'll help you in every one of your relationships. I promise you. First thing to get out of this madness is you actually have to pay attention. You have to notice what is actually going on inside of you. This is what happened when the Desert Fathers got into the desert. when they were away from all the distractions, from all of the noise, and it was just them and the walls of their cell, they were able to pay attention to what was actually going on inside of them. Throwing pots, getting angry, beating their fists on a cell wall, and no one was around for hundreds of miles. No one to get upset at. And they finally started to pay attention to this, right here, what Father said we need to pay attention to. Our feelings, what is actually going on inside. All of us are feeling all of the time. Generally speaking, feeling all the time. But we have become so accustomed to pushing feelings away, repressing them, projecting them on other people, that we don't even know that we're having them. That's the honest to goodness truth. They've become so foreign to us. We're so disconnected because we don't like it. And that, again, that's ordinary. It's okay that you don't like uncomfortable feelings. But I'm going to tell you that if you want to become spiritually mature, if you want to sanctify your Christian life, if you want to become truly human, and that is what the Lord wants for all of us, then you are going to have to get to the place where you can actually identify the way that you feel. And if you think that that's unbiblical, read the Psalms. The Psalter is full of emotion. You can't go a chapter without David emoting all over the page. Right? It's everywhere. So you need to be able to identify the way that you actually feel. And there's lots of people. My daughter Claire, my youngest one that I was telling you about, when she was younger, I got one of those books, emotion books. I don't know if you ever saw that as a parent, but it actually, each page was a different emotion. And I would have her point at them because she had no emotional vocabulary whatsoever. Like no language. Good and bad was about as good as she could do. Right? That was it. And if you have no emotional vocabulary, you can't identify what's going on inside. It is the first step. So, first of all, you've got to be able to pay attention to when something comes up inside of you. Something's tweaked. You talked about this, the passions, right? You talked about an open system with something inserting in. This is what we have to learn to be able to notice. Pay attention. And usually it's psychosomatic. I don't know about you, but I know what happens when I feel certain emotions. When I start getting angry, my jaw tightens like this. It does. I can feel it. My heart will start racing. I have to move, and my mind starts racing. It goes from about 0 to 100. My ex-wife said that when I got angry, I became like an attorney. like a prosecuting attorney, where the logic came out at about 100 miles an hour. Everything just sped up, and it was like some rush of drugs somehow. But there was a real psychosomatic reaction. So do you have those? Do you know what they are? Can you experience it? Now here's the progression. Most of the time, we're looking back and talking about those experiences. Oh yeah, remember when I did that, or remember when, that happened or whatever. Well, that's a place to start, actually. So in my book, Father was talking about that cycle going backwards and how to move backwards in it so you can identify what's really going on in your life. That's the chapter, and it's called Identity Path, and that's exactly what is written in that chapter, is how to go backwards in that loop. But the first part is being able to identify how you feel. And then, as you begin to identify it more and more, then you'll notice it right after it happens. So I just got mad at my wife, and blah, 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 and the fight is over. She's off in her bedroom crying, and all of a sudden it comes to me, what's just happened? But I realize it. Don't fall into despair. You've realized it. You've found awareness. You see how we're backing up each time? And then eventually, you'll be in that fight, and you'll feel it, that switch flip on, or that you'll feel it tweak, and you'll go, it's happening. And you'll know it's there. But you won't be able to do anything about it. And you'll still act out. But you'll notice it. And you'll repent. And you'll ask for forgiveness. And then it'll happen again. And you'll notice it in a moment. And you'll catch yourself. And then what I tell people to do is when you're finally at that point, then you need to externalize it. You need to actually say what's happening. That's exactly what I did with my relationship with my daughter. You take ownership for it and you say, this is what's going on right now. This is my stuff. This has nothing to do with you. These are my feelings. And then, with time, and the grace of God, which we're going to be talking about on how that comes in, you'll get in those moments, and you'll feel it come up, and you'll actually be able to do something with it. And then a new rut starts to take place. A new experience. Those emotions come up, and with the grace of God, you're able to do something with them and move into His life. Something normal. Right? Embrace His life and virtuous behaviors, and there's a new experience. And that new experience begins to change and challenge those beliefs so that there's a more accurate vision of what is truly good and normal. Following me so far? So identifying emotions, feelings, identify emotions. Super important. You need to give yourself some time, so when you blow it, and it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So expect it. It's ordinary. Ask for forgiveness. That's the grace of the cross. Forgiveness, right? Long-suffering, patience, mercy, redemption. You need to be able to extend that to yourself. If we can't accept the Lord's forgiveness, it's as though we're slapping Him on the face on the cross. That what He did is not good. Well, it's good enough for everybody else. It's just not good enough for me, right? It's absolutely good enough for all of us. So be patient with yourself. But the second thing, this is getting, and it gets increasingly more difficult as we go down the list, by the way. So it's one thing to be able to identify emotions, but it's a whole other level to say that they're my emotions. Because normally what happens as soon as we start to get to feel them and identify them and see them in our lives, we immediately want to whoosh. I feel this way because you... What? Or you did this and... Or that happened and I... Do you see what's wrong with that? Yeah, it is ordinary. Welcome to the club. Yeah, right, exactly. So, these all kinds of feelings. You mentioned loneliness. Being able to personalize that you feel lonely. Well, that's really important to say that that's your loneliness. That's your anger. That's your grief. That's your whatever. You fill in the blank. That's yours. It's not anybody else's. And that's really, really hard to do sometimes. Why is it hard to do? Because it's hard to hold brokenness this close. It's hard. You want to push it away. It's hard to hold on to that. But I'm telling you, it's the only way not to end up victimizing someone else. And now we've got a hold. We've got to figure out what to do with it, right? But first of all, you got to hold on to it. It's got to be yours. It's got to be like Rumi. Invite them all in laughing. Yep, this is me. I ate that hoagie last night and got these feelings, and I did this, and I got these feelings, and I went here and met this person. I have these. Welcome them all in. Learn to become comfortable with tension, with the uncomfortable, so that you can bring them into the light. Personalize. The greatest of virtues. Discernment. Oh, I'm sorry. Emotions, feelings. Identify emotions, personalize them. Then you actually have to, remember what Father said? We have to see where they're coming from. We have to see what this demonstrates that this is the way I'm seeing things, and that must be rooted in me believing this, that I'm unworthy, I'm not valuable, I'm not acceptable, whatever. And so we come to this place where we have to actually discern what we're holding on to.